Okay, I've moved the camera over to the bench that has the grinders and buffers and stuff on it, the motor bench, and wanted to show you a way that I now fabricate or shape buttons. I used to do it entirely by hand with emery boards and stuff because there was so little room for error that doing it on any kind of a belt sander or French wheel was an invitation to disaster. You get hours into it at this point, and with a quick blip you can screw something up when it comes to buttons. But as long as there are certain variables in play, it can be done, and done so well that I wanted to share that. And the first order of business is to illustrate the primary variable here. And this clip is just so you can easily see the actual rotational speed of this wheel. Now that'll go down to literally just barely moving. It'll go down to a total stop if I want it to, and then on up to, well, I wouldn't want to pull that clip off, but up to 3,600 RPM. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is an understanding, it took me a while to get to it, which is when you are pressing the button against that moving surface, if it's going too slow, it requires you to do that rocking motion that's necessary to achieve the shape you want so slowly that you can't do it smoothly. You end up with kind of like flat spots and so forth. And if it's spinning too fast, then you lose control because you're forced to just go zip, 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 and you again lose control. However, there's a balance that can be achieved in both rotational speed and the roughness of the paper. I think this is 220, which is, most French wheels are much rougher than that. But we'll get this going about like that. And then you can do this number all day long, and you have marvelous control. Actually, can handle a little bit more. There we go. And I don't know about you, but anytime you can get a machine to do what it took hand motions, your repetitive hand motions with sticks, this is kind of slick, and then some. If you spend all day making stems, something like this is a serious upgrade in your quality of life, we'll put it that way. Now, essential to this method is that the wheel be mounted in this fashion so that you're not pushing blindly into it, but can look straight down at the work. You can't see my face in this thing, but I'm directly over it and a few degrees to one side so I can see some of the curvature of this that we're going after. But anyhow, that's enough to demonstrate what we're doing here. And you can maintain symmetry with no problem. You can really pretty much everything but the absolute final profile contour can be done at a bench like this and be completely done with hand tools. So I'll go ahead and get this close to done and just let the camera run so that you can see it in real time. Okay, back at the main bench from the fine grit French wheel, and the button is what you see here now. And there's some critical steps coming up that I wanted to show you close up in detail. If you're making a button of your own design, you do it however you like. If you're trying to copy something that's already existing, you have to know and use some specialized approaches, techniques, tools, that kind of thing to achieve just what you're looking for. So we're going to get into the specifics of creating a Dunhill button from the pre-1970s, which is the most collectible era from the 20s through the 60s. Anyhow, oh, by the way, I went ahead and just shortened the previous section. I recorded the entire process of me cutting this down, but there really wasn't anything to see after the first 10 or 15 seconds. It's just the nature of the beast, I'm afraid. So that's what we ended up with. And I think you'll agree that the symmetry is excellent, and the taper rate and all that stuff is extremely controllable with that low speed disc. So those of you who have access to a speed controller for your electric motor and can put together a French wheel or a disc with a fine enough sheet of paper on it, that makes a short work of getting your button material down to the height you want. Certainly easier than doing it the old-fashioned way. So anyhow, now you'll notice I left it so that there's too much material both directions, meaning it's too long and too short at the same time, that the button we want is smack in between. And that's for the following reason. The last thing you ever want to do is trim the total length of a button. It's very critical that this dimension be correct. It jumps right out at you. If you see a Dunhill button that's too thin or too long front to back, it immediately screams replica, restem. So the last thing you want to do is adjust the length, and right now we're going to sneak up on the backside, and that could be done in terms of length with this guy. Just put it in there and saw away until it's the length you want. The problem is that from the 20s through the 60s, Dunhill buttons did not have a sharp crease there. They had a radius, not as dramatic as some of the Danes, but still a very small, fine radius. And if it does not, your replica stem has a sharp crease, it again is a signal that it's not an original. So the way to get around that is to create, now this is just a length of I don't even know what tool it came from, but it's a slab of aluminum, and I've ground the edges of this thing in various ways to create angles and radii that are what I'm looking for. And then I coated it or covered it in that hockey tape that you see me use so much. And that's to give it a little bit of spring and so on. You need to have a microscopic amount of flex as a backing for sanding sandpaper, or all it does is load up and glaze. So the way to do this is to put some paper on here, probably around 320 is where I'd start, and using a tool that you've made that has a slight amount of radius here, and you'll have to make your own and experiment by grinding on some scrap and then comparing it with an actual stem and keep tuning it until it looks like what you want it to look like. And we're going to actually sand our way forward, because if you use this thing right off the bat and you don't get the curve, you have to actually eat away about a half a millimeter of length before the curve kicks in, if that makes sense. And we also left the bite zone a little bit thick because there's going to be some sanding that unavoidably you're going to be mostly putting pressure forward, but unavoidably going to be putting some flat down, so you're going to be thinning the bite area at the same time that you're extending it into this slab of butt material. So 320 probably. You might even try 280 at this point. Depends on how much confidence you feel and how much extra you left in the bite zone here. You could also, if on your early attempts, if this is too scary, is just use ordinary Scotch tape over this area on both sides and then take it off when you're getting close to your finished length on this. So anyhow, I'm going to now do what I just described, and then I'll turn the camera back on when I've accomplished that. You can see what's what. So we're getting there, and it's looking pretty good. I think this pipe is going to be pretty special. Also, coming up shortly, we got to put a dot in here, and that's a separate subject, because sizing dots and all that is trickier than it sounds for reasons that are not apparent to anybody who's not a shop person. So, but you guys are by definition, or you wouldn't be tuning in, so we'll cover that. Back in a minute.